Hi, this is Andrea. I'm an autism mum. If you're listening for the first time, I'm here to be the voice of my daughter, other parents, professionals, and neurodivergent individuals through our own lived experiences. I want to give visibility to these superstars that most of the time behind the scenes make a huge impact on neurodivergent lives. Welcome to the Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. Welcome to the last solo episode of the first season of the Neurodiverse Voices Podcast. What can I say? This new adventure of mine started 4 months ago. An adventure that I never thought would be happening. Sometimes I still need to pinch myself to make sure that it is real. However, it is an adventure that I feel really proud of. On the day I decided that my podcast would be focused on neurodiversity, I have to admit that the decision came out from anger. I had just visited a special educational needs school where, like hundreds of other parents, heard the same. We would love to help every single one of your children, but unfortunately, we have no capacity. We will prioritize giving places to children with more severe cases, and we are already full for the next 2 years. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. Like hundreds of other parents in Oxfordshire, I felt outraged. What is considered severe? And I say this understanding what severe cases may be. Is my daughter's case ever going to be considered for a placement because it's not severe enough? Where does she fit in all of this? Her current mainstream school is supporting her as best as they can, with all the resources they have available, with the best of their ability and knowledge. Nonetheless, they are recommending a specialist setting because there's only so much they can do, and all the staff cares deeply about my daughter's future. At the same time, specialist schools are full in capacity. I am so furious with the whole situation that I felt a deep eagerness to open a school that could support primary school age children like my daughter, because there's not many provisions that would do that. There are so many of us in a similar situation. Well, instead, I launched a podcast. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. But on that same day, amidst all the anger and frustration feelings that I was having, all the pieces of my vision of the education system came together. A model that I do not understand how and why no one in power had thought about. Or maybe they did, but thinking is not enough when there are so many children excluded from school, when there are so many children being failed by the system. It's time to take action. Action that will take years to be visible. It's more than time to change an education system that is old-fashioned. A system that is a struggle for children, young people, teachers, and parents. It's time that our voices are actually listened to by those in power. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. Historically, this world is filled with binaries. Male, female, hetero, homosexual, black, white. Over time, these binaries become more and more irrelevant as we evolve and open our minds to extended definitions of gender, sexual orientation, and race. This is a reality that must be accepted. It's all about respect. It's all about opening our minds to this new truth. It's all about expanding our horizons to a world where difference is reaffirmed and seen positively. In my perspective, difference makes this world only a better place. I do understand those traditional minds, those who believe that the use of gender pronouns, for example, is a bit too much. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. We cannot deny nature. However, in my point of view, for as long as the individual who identifies differently from the gender norm is not causing any harm to others or to themselves, It's none of our business. We are no one to judge, because no one can know how others feel in their own skin. And yes, it might be confusing to children, but if we start educating them towards understanding, they will be better equipped in the future to accept difference. As parents, we tend to always be protective and most of the time hide our children from the hard reality of life. However, they need to be prepared to face this hardness at some point in their journeys. So speak openly with your children and encourage them to be curious. It is with their curiosity that they will learn. And children are curious, and so there are always strategies for us to be able to educate them and speak to them openly about anything they asked us about. What is the point of forcing someone to be someone who they are not? That's where the risk of harm lies in. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. And now we have the neurotypical versus neurodivergent binary. As science and knowledge progresses, there is a spike in diagnosis of autism, ADHD, PDA, dyslexia, etc. Even though there are still many questions left to be answered. And no, there is nothing wrong with the water. And no, it's not about the technology we use today. Not about the high pollution levels or climate change. And no, autism cannot be cured with a vaccine. It was simply not talked about or understood before. Knowing that academic research continues to investigate neurodivergence can only keep us hopeful. Studies like the Autism Character Strengths that I'm part of are already proving to shift the negative perspective around autism and allowing us to focus on the strengths of autistic young people as opposed to what we see as weaknesses. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. But meanwhile, our current systems continuously fail our neurodivergent people. Our society constantly judges. Yes, awareness is rising, but there's still a long way to go until we reach acceptance. There is a lot of kindness in this world, but sadly, there is also a lot of cruelty. All these binaries allow possibilities of inequality, giving room for some to be privileged over others. And don't get me wrong, by accepting difference, we need to understand that what is suitable for some might not be suitable for others. It's all about creating environments that provide equal opportunities, environments that are inclusive of all, regardless of gender, race, age, or neuro capabilities. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. It's about treating everyone with the due fairness and respect that is rightfully deserved. And that's where the current education system fails. It's designed for the norm, based on a set of outdated and old-fashioned values that excludes neurodivergent children from the opportunity to learn and develop their skills, preventing them from achieving their highest potential. Because it was designed for children to learn a national curriculum of varied subjects that misses out the fact that we, humans, are all neurodiverse, and some are divergent from the typical. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. The issue is that it's not even working well for neurotypical children. But I can see the lights at the end of the tunnel. I am speaking to you on the day after the UK general elections. And the British people voted for change. Thank God for that. Am I hopeful? I think a change of government is definitely a first step towards change. We lived 14 years under the same government, and I always believe that change is a good thing. What do I hope for? I hope that mainstream schools are supported financially to be able to train teaching staff on supporting neurodivergent children. That financial support also helps expanding school sites so that more spaces are made available, relieving the waiting lists for specialist settings. that there is a limit of a maximum of 6 neurodivergent children in the classroom, that there is investment in new schools, that those responsible for the cases of special educational needs young people are supported by the LA, so that their services are enhanced and communication improved urgently. Waiting 4 months for a response and having to chase SEN case officers is not okay. I hope that as a society, the stigma around neurodivergent people dissipates over time. It's not rocket science. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. What makes me believe that all of this can happen? The amazing community of parents who are brave enough to use their voices and come together, fighting for their young people's rights and for them to have a better future. The restless group of professionals like teachers who are curious and look up to change through learning. Local support organizations who work tirelessly with neurodivergent young people to help them thrive. Schools like my daughter's, where she can be herself, being accepted, included, well looked after and loved not only by teachers, staff, but also other children. The fantastic alternative provisions like Oxford Creators and the Harbour Self-Directed Learning Centre, who use alternative and creative teaching methods, allowing young people to flourish, improving their mental health. Those parents like me, who constantly raise awareness of neurodivergence by speaking proudly of their children. My daughter, and every step of progress I see on her every day. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. With the launch of the Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, I committed myself to a new journey of learning. And over the past 4 months, I have learned so much. In the midst of all the hats I wear, which are being a mom, a project manager, a SEN parent advocate, a girlfriend, a daughter, a niece, a granddaughter, a friend, somehow I managed to find time to attend webinars like those from Autism Champions, where I always learn a lot from Dee and her team. They are fantastic. Workshops about neurodiversity. Reading books such as Neurodiversity and Education by Professor Amanda Kirby, Paul Hellis, and Abby Osborne. Emma Kendall's Perfectly Autistic and Autism Masking books. She's autistic herself, and you learn a lot from her own lived experience. Some TV programs also helped me with my learning. I highly recommend Chris Packham's documentary on BBC called Inside Our Autistic Minds. Chris presents 4 autistic individuals with the mission to raise awareness and to show how unique each autistic person can be, proving that there is a misconception of how autistic traits are displayed. There is this idea that everyone is the same. Chris is autistic himself and is also an ambassador of the National Autistic Society. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. I also watched Temple Grandin. It's available on Amazon Prime Video. Temple is one of the first autistic people to document the insights she gained from her personal lived experiences with autism. The movie, it's the story of her life and how she grew up at a time where there was very little known about autism. And to me, it was an eye-opener. So I totally recommend it. I learned about the brilliant Australian comedian Hannah Gadsby, that on her episodes Nanette and Douglas made me laugh as much as cry by coming out as autistic to her audience and sharing her struggles growing up in a small mindset town in Australia. And I am going to see her live in London in November, which I'm very excited about. Yay! Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. I also did my first ever 5-mile walk and raised £350 for the National Autistic Society during World Autism Acceptance Week. I learned how to fundraise. It was a first. I had never done it before. I did a series of talks about autism at a local school to explain to children that being different is okay. And my heart was filled with happiness when I heard from the teachers that the talks had a positive impact on the way children look at themselves, and that they acknowledge that it is okay to be autistic. That's fantastic news to me. I made a lot of new connections with parents, autistic people, professionals within the different sectors. I was interviewed by ITV News Meridian for their upcoming documentary, Send Spotlight. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. And I interviewed 7 superstars along the way, from whom I learned a lot too. Thank you, Vina, Leandra, Tom, Gloria, Rachel, Cheryl, and Jamie. Thank you, Darren, for the opportunity to interview at the Katie Pills and Rugby Festival. From there, thank you to Becky, Maddie, Jess and Ben, Rachel, and John. I recorded 5 solo episodes with very positive feedback from listeners who can relate and are appreciative of me coming out there and sharing my own lived experience. This has been a fantastic first season, with over 200 plays in only 4 months. It might not sound a lot, but it means the world to me. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. And now it's time for a break. A break that will not really be a break, because this brain of mine never really stops and ideas keep flowing. Ideas that I do not want to disregard for season 2. I have also already recorded 3 episodes for the new season that need to be edited. I'm hoping to recharge my batteries over the summer and come back filled with energy after doing a scoping review of everything I learned. And I can tell you one thing: despite any enhancements that I might apply to the Neurodiverse Voices podcast, I will continue being authentic, with the promise to continue bringing guest superstars who walk alongside me in this journey of celebrating difference. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being on that side. Thank you for all your support throughout the past 4 months. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. My next and last guest of this season is Jamie, Operations Manager and Neurodiversity Lead at Response. Jamie is not only an autism dad, but also autistic himself, and he told me all about his own lived experience. He also has a teaching background and is very passionate about his advocacy for neurodiversity. So do not miss it. The episode will be out on the 27th of July. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference. I hope to have you back on that side on the 7th of September for the first episode of Season 2 with my guest Darren, Youth Chair and lead of the Send Rugby sessions at Gosford All Blacks. This time I got a full interview with him. And remember, I believe in the good things coming. So you should too. Have a wonderful summer. Neurodiverse Voices Podcast, celebrating difference.